Beneath the surface of our planet, there are tunnels that simply should not exist. We are not talking about modern subways, mining shafts, or sewer systems. These are ancient subterranean passageways, carved into solid rock with such chilling precision and scale that today's engineers just shake their heads. They admit that recreating them would require heavy boring machines, modern explosives, and years of work. Yet these tunnels were constructed thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of years ago. They were supposedly built by people who, according to mainstream science, possessed nothing more than primitive stone hammers and bronze chisels. Official historical records assure us that ancient civilizations only built underground structures for very clear and understandable everyday purposes. You and I have been taught that early. Humans dug into the earth merely to store food, hide from invaders, or conduct quiet religious rituals. In most cases, that makes perfect sense. Across the globe, there are thousands of subterranean cities and catacombs that align perfectly with basic survival needs. But when we look closer, we find anomalies that shatter this neat historical narrative. We find tunnels that are far too long, flawlessly straight, and impossibly deep, carved straight through bedrock that is entirely too hard for the crude tools of their respective eras. These are forgotten pathways with no clear historical purpose, and their dark roots do not lead to any logical destination. They force us to question the absolute limits of what we think we know. It feels as if they were designed by an intelligence operating on an entirely different scale, someone who possessed lost technologies we have yet to rediscover, or perhaps an entity entirely outside our conventional human lineage. I realize how extreme that sounds, but when you descend into the dark dampness of such a tunnel and you run your bare hand across a rock wall polished to a glass-like sheen for miles on end, everything shifts. When you stare down, perfectly circular shaft that never varies a single inch in diameter, you cannot help but ask the questions that mainstream science struggles to answer. Today, we are going to explore 4 of these impossible tunnels. 4 ancient underground mysteries that challenge the very foundation of our historical timelines. The first anomaly lies hidden within the subterranean networks of Ecuador. In the 1960s, an explorer named Juan Morix made a startling claim. He announced that he had located an entrance to a massive underground system deep within the eastern Ecuadorian jungle. According to his reports, these tunnels stretched for hundreds of kilometers beneath the continent, allegedly linking Ecuador with Peru and potentially extending into Brazil. He stated that local Shuar indigenous guides, who had guarded the secret for generations and revered the tunnels as the work of gods, led him inside. He described vast chambers with perfectly smooth walls, strangely precise niches cut into the solid rock, and mysterious artifacts far beyond the capabilities of known ancient cultures. Official scientific circles responded to his bold claims with entirely predictable skepticism. Established researchers argued that he was either wildly exaggerating the scale of ordinary karst caves or fabricating the entire story from scratch. Karst caves are simply natural cavities formed within limestone, slowly hollowed out by flowing water over millions of years. It is true that they can grow exceptionally large and sometimes weave into extensive networks beneath the earth. Mainstream geologists insisted there was absolutely nothing artificial or mysterious about the site, calling it pure geological routine. Because he failed to provide undeniable physical proof to back up his extraordinary claims, the establishment quickly dismissed the entire incident and buried the story. The narrative shifted when Swiss author Erich von Daniken traveled to Ecuador in the early 1970s. He documented the tunnels in his writings, implying he had witnessed their wonders firsthand. It later surfaced that he never actually descended into the depths himself. but was merely relaying older tales. This revelation severely damaged the credibility of the entire mystery. It seemed like the case was finally closed, written off as just another wild fantasy spun by sensation seekers. Yet, reality has a strange way of resurfacing. In the 1990s, multiple professional caving expeditions genuinely uncovered a vast subterranean network in that exact region. They called it the Cave of the Oilbirds, named after the nocturnal birds nesting near the dark entrance. The sheer scale of the discovery was staggering. Explorers mapped several kilometers of passageways, revealing massive halls towering 50 meters high. Dark corridors stretched endlessly into the abyss, extending far beyond the limits of their climbing gear. This is exactly where the easy geological explanations began to fall apart. Natural caves possess a very specific signature. They feature jagged, uneven walls and smoothly rounded ceilings shaped by ancient water currents. But this mysterious cavern looked entirely different. Many of the deep corridors displayed a strict rectangular cross-section. The walls were unnervingly straight, almost completely vertical, meeting rock ceilings that were perfectly flat. That is simply not how wild nature carves stone in the deep dark. Geologists quickly offered a defense. They argued that sharp geometry can occur naturally when water erodes rock along perfect horizontal and vertical fault lines. While possible in a textbook, finding such incredibly long, arrow-straight corridors with flat ceilings is virtually unheard of in nature. The geometry was only the first problem. Deep within several of the grand halls, explorers discovered distinct markings on the walls that looked uncomfortably like the deliberate strikes of heavy tools. These were evenly spaced, parallel grooves that seemed far too systematic to be the random work of natural water erosion. Once again, mainstream science pushed back, claiming these were merely exposed crystalline structures revealed by slow rock weathering over countless eons. That weathering theory failed to convince a seasoned engineer on the expedition. After 20 years in commercial mining, he stated plainly that he had seen those exact parallel grooves before, but only on the walls of tunnels carved by heavy mechanical boring machines, never in raw nature. Then there is the incomprehensible scale of the site. While the mapped section spanned kilometers, sonar readings proved the hollow system continued much deeper into the earth. Certain passageways plunged straight down, far beyond the reach of their gear. The indigenous Shuar people have always maintained that these pathways stretch to the edge of the world, whispering ancient tales of ancestors who climbed downward for days without ever finding an end to the darkness. It is easy to brush those stories off as mere mythology, but ancient myths are almost always anchored in a kernel of truth. Here is where the record gets truly bizarre. In 1976, a massive British expedition ventured into this exact cave system. It was a highly funded operation boasting 100 specialists, including top geologists and master cavers. The most shocking detail is the identity of their honorary chairman. It was Neil Armstrong. Yes, the very astronaut who took our first steps on the moon. Why would a man who walked on another world risk crawling through an unmapped cave in the sweltering Ecuadorian jungle? The official story claims it was mere personal curiosity, a simple hobbyist interest in archaeology. Perhaps that is the whole truth, but here is what fuels the suspicion. After returning, Armstrong remained incredibly quiet about the ordeal. Whenever journalists pressed him for details, he offered only elusive answers. The only firm statement he gave was that the descent was one of the most profound experiences of his entire life. Think about the weight of those words. For a man who literally stood on the desolate surface of the moon, that is a staggering admission. The choice of this exact cavern at that precise moment in history, with such a high-level team, feels anything but random. This brings us to our second anomaly, the sprawling underground labyrinth of Derinkuyu in Turkey. Cappadocia is a central Turkish region highly famous for its strange rock formation and deeply buried ancient cities. In this soft volcanic rock, ancient people carved settlements deep into the earth. The most famous and incredibly deep among them is Derinkuyu. This complex plunges 18 distinct levels down, reaching a staggering depth of 60 meters. In the dark, you find perfectly preserved living quarters, kitchens, churches, schools, stables, and critical ventilation shafts. Experts estimate it could shelter 20 to 50,000 people at once, alongside livestock and massive food supplies. This is no primitive cave. It is a fully functioning subterranean metropolis. Official history dictates that early Christians carved it to hide from brutal Roman persecution and later Arab and Mongol invasions. The mainstream historical logic is comfortably simple and neat. The invaders march in, the locals vanish below ground, wait out the slaughter and emerge. It is entirely practical. However, while this standard narrative explains why the city was used, it completely fails to explain how or when it was constructed. Yes, volcanic tuff is forgiving. You can scrape it away with basic metal tools. But Derinkuyu is not merely a handful of crude rooms chipped into a hillside. We are talking about tens of thousands of cubic meters of solid stone that had to be meticulously carved out, hauled to the surface, and somehow hidden away. Every single level features hundreds of complex rooms tied together by tight corridors, with massive ventilation shafts piercing straight through all 18 floors to provide fresh air 60 meters down. The water supply was masterfully engineered so that if an enemy breached the upper floors, they could not poison the drinking water below. This was not the desperate improvisation of terrified farmers fleeing for their lives. This was a calculated engineering project of colossal proportions. Yet, the true architect remains completely erased from history. The most baffling aspect is not the sprawling city itself. The real mystery lies in the dark. Silent tunnels extending outward from its deepest borders. In 2014, Turkish archaeologists made a startling discovery. They found that from the lowest depths of Derinkuyu, incredibly long subterranean corridors stretch out through the earth, directly connecting it to completely separate underground cities hidden away. Stick with me, this is where the scale of it all truly stops making sense. One tunnel links Derinkuyu to another submerged city called Kamakli, stretching 9 kilometers. That is 9 kilometers of continuous underground passage, carved with a perfectly uniform height to allow a burdened person to walk upright. It features engineered air flow and massive stone doors designed to seal from the inside. Mainstream science shrugs, claiming people chipped away at it slowly, generation after generation. It sounds reasonable on paper. But you and I need to look at the raw math. If you calculate the volume of material removed for a 9-kilometer shaft, you hit a terrifying dead end. We are talking about tens of thousands of tons of heavy rock. Where did it all vanish to? If you scan the surrounding landscape, there are no massive debris mounds to account for that missing stone. It is as if the extracted rock was vaporized or carried off to a location we have yet to uncover. Here is where the mystery deepens into something far more unsettling. Many researchers now suspect that the tunnel systems of Cappadocia do not stop at these few known sites. They believe these pitch-black corridors plunge further, weaving into a massive, interconnected web spanning the entire region. The cities we know might just be the highest floors of a colossal subterranean world. Orthodox archaeologists wave this off as pure speculation. Yet without fail, entirely new buried structures and ancient pathways are discovered in the bedrock every single year. Come with me, we are about to investigate a mystery hiding beneath our feet. In 2013, construction crews in the Turkish city of Nevşehir accidentally cracked open a massive underground metropolis. It dwarfs the famous subterranean sprawl of Derinkuyu, yet remains barely explored. But here is the question historians rarely ask aloud. Why dig so incredibly deep? If you only need to hide from a passing army, 2 levels will do the job. Just roll a heavy stone over the door and wait. So why carve 18 levels down into solid rock? Why bore 9 kilometers of winding tunnels? Why engineer ventilation capable of keeping tens of thousands of people breathing? What kind of terrifying enemy forces an entire civilization to retreat that deeply into the pitch-black earth? Scholars claim they hid from a relentless foe. Yet looking at the region's history, no known enemy ever sustained long underground sieges. The Mongols swept through and vanished. Arab armies attacked and retreated. Nobody waged war in the deep dirt. So, who were the builders of Derinkuyu actually fleeing? Or perhaps the better question is, what were they fleeing? This brings us to a third anomalous site, the Ravne tunnels in Bosnia. Our investigation begins with Europe's most fiercely debated archaeological mystery. In 2005, researcher Semir Osmanagic made a staggering public claim. He announced that the towering formations near the town of Visoko were not natural hills, but ancient pyramids swallowed by time. Buried beneath thousands of years of thick soil and dense forest canopy, the scientific establishment quickly attacked this assertion. Geologists insisted the structures were naturally formed, noting that pyramidal hills exist globally. Archaeologists declared no civilization capable of building pyramids ever lived in ancient Bosnia. The subject was branded pseudoscience, and Osmanagic was called a fraud. But we must not hastily deny what we haven't fully investigated. Shortly after the fierce backlash, a massive network of subterranean passages was discovered beneath one of those very hills. This system became known as Ravne. Suddenly, the academic mockery stopped. The underground labyrinth was undeniably real. Investigators quickly realized these shadowy passages were not natural limestone caves, nor were they simple medieval mine shafts left behind by ordinary peasant laborers. These engineered corridors were carved directly into a dense conglomerate of compressed stones, sand, and clay. Estimates suggest this winding labyrinth stretches from a few hundred meters to several twisting kilometers. Though the vast majority remains blocked and unexplored, mainstream institutions initially tried to write the tunnels off as standard medieval mining operations, since historical miners extracted ore in Bosnia. Digging tunnels sounds logical at first glance, yet examining the physical evidence, that convenient theory shatters. There are absolutely no signs of actual ore extraction inside the network. You will not find carved niches for wooden support beams. You will not see heavy pickaxe marks scarring the walls, and strangely, there are no piles of discarded waste rock left behind. Miners leave clear signatures of their labor, yet this underground environment lacks those fingerprints entirely. Second, we must examine the geometry. Normal mine shafts are dug to chase ore veins, twisting and plunging toward valuable minerals. The Ravne tunnels, however, march straight ahead at a strictly uniform depth. Their purpose was seemingly never extraction, but creating a direct connection between 2 points. Third, and perhaps most crucially, we must consider the atmosphere. Independent scientific measurements reveal the air deep within Ravne holds an inexplicably high concentration of negative ions. While orthodox institutions often treat anomalous atmospheric ionization with heavy skepticism, the data recorded in that pitch-black space remains an undeniable, persistent fact. Multiple independent groups conducted strict atmospheric testing, and all recorded the exact same numbers. The negative ion concentration in those corridors was dozens of times higher than anything measured in the open air. There is no conventional explanation. The surrounding geology simply cannot produce that kind of energetic effect. Furthermore, underground airflow is virtually non-existent. Where is this highly ionized air originating inside a sealed chamber? It remains a profound mystery. Then comes an even more unsettling oddity, the timeline. When researchers ran radiocarbon dating on organic debris pulled from the collapsed tunnel blockages, the data completely baffled the scientific community. Astoundingly, several of the recovered biological samples tested at well over 30,000 years old. 30,000 years. According to mainstream models, Europe at that time was populated exclusively by Cro-Magnons. We are taught they were hunter-gatherers tracking mammoths and painting bison on cave walls. They were definitely not engineering subterranean labyrinths. They entirely lacked the tools, societal organization, and motivation to manipulate solid stone on an industrial scale. So who actually dug these paths? Official archaeology offers a predictably simple dismissal. They point out that radiocarbon dating only reveals the age of the organic matter, not the surrounding rock. A piece of ancient wood, they claim, could have easily washed into the rubble from the surface. By this conservative logic, the tunnels themselves might be medieval, and the prehistoric wood simply tumbled into the dark by pure chance. That argument sounds reasonable, but when multiple samples from completely different sections of the network all return the same ancient timeline, brushing it off as mere coincidence becomes incredibly difficult. Today, Semir Osmanagic is still down there, pushing the excavation forward. Every passing season, his team unseals fresh stretches of the labyrinth. And every season, they unearth anomalies generating far more questions than answers. Mainstream science stubbornly labels the endeavor as pseudo-archaeology, but the physical tunnels remain. They are definitively man-made. They are undeniably ancient, and their true purpose is an absolute void in our understanding. These are cold facts that neither believers nor harsh critics can logically deny. This brings us to our fourth subterranean mystery: the Longyou caves in eastern China. In 1992, a Chinese farmer named Wu Anai decided to drain a murky pond near his village in Zhejiang province. He hoped to find a bounty of fish trapped at the bottom. Instead, he unknowingly broke the seal on an entrance to a forgotten underworld. As pumps cleared the water, a massive system of artificial caves was revealed, boasting a scale that stunned investigators. They found 24 gigantic subterranean halls, meticulously carved straight into a monolithic sandstone ridge. Each cavern stretches for dozens of meters across, with cathedral-like ceilings soaring up to 30 meters high. These heavy roofs were supported by thick stone pillars, chiseled from the exact same continuous bedrock. The sheer volume of stone completely removed from this shadowy expanse, nearly 1 million cubic meters. 1 million cubic meters equals 400 Olympic swimming pools packed with solid rock. This leads to our first glaring question. Where did all that stone go? That much bedrock should create mountains of gravel visible from miles away. Yet surveying the area, you will find absolutely nothing. There are no artificial hills of discarded waste, no ravines filled with debris, and no local structures built from that specific sandstone. The rock simply vanished. It is as if the builders vaporized the material, or hauled it somewhere so distant we still haven't found it. This brings us to a second, highly complex puzzle. How exactly was this massive excavation achieved? Every inch of the cavern walls is covered in striking parallel grooves, permanently scarred by the rhythmic bite of unknown ancient tools. These uniform grooves maintain the exact same depth and width across the entire rock face. These are not the haphazard marks of a primitive pickaxe. Manual strikes leave jagged, chaotic scarring. Instead, these patterns look like the tracks of something moving with constant speed and controlled pressure, shockingly similar to a modern mechanical cutter. Yet consensus dates these caves to 2,000 years ago. In that era, such machinery did not exist. History insists they only used simple chisels, hammers, and raw muscle. Are we expected to believe that using basic hand tools? An unnamed workforce hollowed out 1,000,000 cubic meters of stone. They somehow carved flat walls, sweeping ceilings, and towering columns that were never stacked, but masterfully left behind as unbroken pieces of the living bedrock. Leaving pillars untouched while hollowing out a mountain requires more than brute labor. It demands an advanced plan with complex load calculations and a deep understanding of where to cut. Miscalculate slightly, and the stone roof crushes you. This is a level of structural engineering we rarely credit to ancient China. This leads to our third maddening question. Why the 24 halls sit right next to each other, yet they never connect? Each cavern is an isolated chamber with its own entrance. The dividing walls are unnervingly thin, sometimes just half a meter across, yet they are never once accidentally breached. The mysterious builders possessed a flawless, almost terrifying spatial awareness. They knew exactly where the neighboring chamber was hiding in the pitch-black rock. And they knew precisely when their digging had to stop. Why build 24 separate halls instead of one colossal cavern? Why divide the space with razor-thin walls, yet refuse to carve connecting doorways? The layout defies logic entirely. It doesn't resemble a dwelling, lacks temple features, is highly impractical as a storage depot, and makes no sense as a military bunker. Its true purpose is a blank. This brings us to the fourth and perhaps most unsettling question. Why is there absolutely no mention of these massive caves in any Chinese historical chronicles? We are looking at a civilization renowned for recording everything. For millennia, they maintained hyper-detailed ledgers, meticulously documenting minor earthquakes, seasonal floods, local crop yields, exact tax collections, and even the mundane appointments of low-level bureaucrats. A massive project like this, requiring thousands of workers, decades of toil, and the removal of 1,000,000 cubic meters of rock would absolutely be documented. Yet, in all the imperial archives, there is not a single line of text. The Longyou caves do not exist in written history. It is as if they were carved by a society that kept no ledgers, or one whose records were completely erased. Or perhaps they were built long before writing was even invented. Speak to locals whose families have lived here for generations, and they say the caverns have always been there. They insist no human hands dug them out, claiming the voids existed before people arrived. Village elders recall their grandfathers knew about the hidden pits but firmly refused to descend, believing the pitch-black underground was a deeply unnatural place. Stick with me, because our investigation takes a strange turn here. Local folklore claimed bizarre sounds drifted up from the dark pits, something between a deep hum and a low chant, especially before a storm. When researchers planted microphones inside the halls, they actually captured it. The instruments recorded a persistent, low-frequency drone hovering at the edge of human hearing. The official explanation dismisses this as the natural resonance of trapped air reacting to barometric shifts. Perhaps it is, but locals heard that hum centuries before physics gave it a name. And they had a different explanation entirely. They believed the caves were breathing. Obviously, orthodox science refuses to take such folklore seriously. Yet the frustrating truth is that beyond a vague theory about air pressure, modern science still lacks a definitive explanation for the noise. Let us review the facts. 24 halls carved into rock, A million cubic meters of vanished stone, traces of advanced tooling. Zero historical documentation, and silence. A heavy subterranean silence persisting for 30 years since discovery. Simply because no one can explain Longyou. Now, we step back and evaluate the grand puzzle. 4 mysterious tunnels. 4 underground systems buried on different continents, carved into different rock, surrounded by different cultures. Ecuador, Turkey, Bosnia, and China. They are separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, yet laying the evidence side by side. All 4 sites share impossible traits we can no longer afford to ignore. The first undeniable denominator is the overwhelming scale. All 4 of these subterranean networks are absolutely massive. We are not looking at ancient root cellars or crude storage pantries here. Let us look closely at the physical reality of these sites. We are talking about kilometers of tunnels plunging deep into the earth, with massive volumes of solid rock removed. This was not the work of a few families digging out a cellar. These projects demanded organization and resources on a scale rivaling modern construction. Then there is the second detail you and I cannot simply ignore: the precision. The walls are impossibly smooth, the corridors perfectly uniform. You can see parallel grooves in the stone, scarring typically left only by heavy mechanical tools. Across all 4 locations, this level of stonework completely baffles professional engineers who cut through bedrock for a living today. Which brings us to the third anomaly. No one actually knows why they were built. Not one of these 4 underground networks possesses a clear function. You might explain Derinkuyu as a bunker to hide from invaders, though its staggering depth makes that theory feel incomplete. But with Longyou, the Cueva de los Teos or the Ravne tunnels, the standard logic shatters. Why were they carved? For whom? There are 0 answers. This brings us to the 4th puzzle. The absolute silence of recorded history. Not a single ancient chronicle mentions their construction. It is as if they materialized out of thin air, or existed so far in the past that all memory washed away. Or, perhaps more unsettling, the architects were not the people who later wrote our history. It is incredibly easy to just brush this anomaly aside and tell ourselves they are nothing more than natural caves. We know nature creates amazing geological forms, and the human mind loves to fill in the blanks. You could argue ancient societies were simply far more patient than we give them credit for. If we looked at just one site, we could probably force a conventional explanation to fit. But when you and I see 4 distinct tunnel systems spread across 4 continents, sharing the exact same impossible traits, you realize this is no coincidence. The massive scale, the machine-like precision, the missing history. There is a forgotten layer of truth hiding behind these underground walls. Something existed long before our recorded era. Something that possessed the incredible capability to slice through solid bedrock with a level of mechanical mastery that we have only managed to achieve in the last 200 years. And then, whatever this presence was, it simply vanished. It faded into the shadows of our distant past without leaving behind a single written word, a single drawing, or a single clear clue about its true identity. They left us with absolutely nothing but the hollowed earth itself. Just kilometers of cold, empty tunnels stretching out into the pitch blackness. When you stand down there, the mystery becomes almost suffocating. These corridors remain perfectly silent, their rock walls impossibly smooth to the touch, defying everything we thought we knew about the timeline of human progress. They are just sitting deep beneath the surface, holding on to a secret that we have yet to properly uncover, patient, completely undisturbed, and quietly waiting for us to finally dig up the truth.